From the moment you touch down at Hong Kong Airport, you are overwhelmed by the pace and modernity of the city and its surroundings. It's a fast-moving, commercially oriented and prosperous country. 17 years ago, after 155 years of British rule, Hong Kong was handed back to mainland China on the condition that it retain its laws and a high degree of economic and political autonomy for 50 years after the transfer. With the pace of change, it's hard to imagine that there's much evidence remaining that this was once a British possession. However, I can tell you that British heritage in Hong Kong is alive and well. To a visitor from the British Isles, there's something very familiar about Hong Kong. The street names have a familiar ring. The traffic still drives on the left. In China, of course, the rule of the road was changed in 1946, ostensibly as a rejection of imperialist values. The pedestrian crossings have Belisha beacons. The double-decker buses are distinctly British. They're just a bit longer and have more wheels. And the Chinese ladies who deliver public announcements have British accents.
Please beware of the platform gap when boarding and alighting, and take extra care of children.
There are English language newspapers and English language TV and radio channels. And the noonday gun still fires at midday. It seems that some British institutions are still intact. Not entirely a British institution, the Star Ferry has been shuttling back and forth across Victoria Harbour since 1888, when it was founded as the Kowloon Ferry Company by an Indian businessman named Nauroji. 10 years later, he retired and sold his company to the Scottish entrepreneurs Jardine Matheson. But before he went, Nauroji renamed it the Star Ferry Company Limited, apparently inspired by a line in Tennyson's poetry. The Star Ferry was the only public transport across the harbour until the first cross-harbour tunnel was opened in 1972. Nowadays you can travel by bus, train or taxi between Kowloon and Victoria, and the role of the Star Ferry is much diminished, but it remains popular, and at $2.50 a trip it's ridiculously cheap. When you get to the Hong Kong side, the ferry terminal is relatively new. This is because the Hong Kongers have periodic bouts of land reclamation, which totally alter the geography of the shoreline. I believe the last significant piece of reclamation on Hong Kong Island was in 2006, when the Star Ferry terminal was demolished amid a public outcry. It's now a 15-minute walk from the new Star Ferry terminal to Chater Road, which is where we find Statue Square and the Cenotaph, which, like a lot of places we'll see in this film, used to be on the waterfront. If the cenotaph looks familiar, it's because it's virtually identical to the cenotaph in Whitehall, as well as cenotaphs in other Commonwealth countries. The Whitehall cenotaph was unveiled in 1920, the Hong Kong replica in 1923. Statue Square, built on reclaimed land at the end of the 19th century, was the original home of the bronze statue of Queen Victoria, which was unveiled in 1896 to celebrate the monarch's 77th birthday. During the wartime occupation, Victoria and all the other statues of royalty that had subsequently gathered around her were shipped off to Japan to be melted down. After the war, Victoria was repatriated to Hong Kong and is now the dominant feature of Victoria Park in Causeway Bay. Ironically, the only statue in Statue Square these days is of Sir Thomas Jackson, the third manager of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and a notable benefactor of the city. Also spared the wartime melting pot were the two iconic HSBC lions, which now guard the bank's Hong Kong headquarter building. The lions are 1935 copies of the 1923 Shanghai originals, and their fame is such that they feature prominently on banknotes issued by the HSBC. Adjacent to Statue Square is the former Supreme Court building, which was home to the Legislative Council between 1985 and 2011. Seen here undergoing remedial work, the former Supreme Court is a two-storey neoclassical building supported on all sides by columns. It was opened in 1912 and is now preserved as an historical monument. If we now go about a mile to the west, we come to the Western Market in Connaught Road. Dating from 1906, this attractive Edwardian-style building is the oldest surviving market building in the city. It used to house a food market until 1988, but now it contains an interesting selection of small shops. It's a short walk from here to Possession Street. This area, which came to be known as Possession Point, is where Commodore James Bramer took formal possession of Hong Kong on the 26th of January 1841. The actual point of landing is probably where Hollywood Road Park is situated, but of course this area is now nowhere near the sea. Hollywood Road was only the second road to be built in Hong Kong, the first being Queen's Road. Because it was close to the waterside, legend has it that sailors would come ashore here and attempt to sell items they had acquired in China, thus creating the beginnings of the antique trade for which Hollywood Road has become renowned. At the eastern end of Hollywood Road, there is a very imposing set of buildings concerned with the maintenance of law and order. Victoria Prison, built in 1841, is said to have been the first solidly constructed building in Hong Kong, being made of granite and brick. Located in the appropriately named Old Bailey Street, the prison was used by the Immigration Department up until 2005. Right in front of the prison is the former police headquarters block dating from 1919, but the barrack block behind is that much older and dates from 1864. Around the corner, in a very imposing position, is the Magistracy, a grandiose building inspired by Greek architecture. Being side by side, the police station, the courthouse and the prison were conveniently connected by tunnels for the moving of prisoners. Back in the day, these buildings must have made a very intimidating statement of colonial authority. Now they are all preserved as monuments of historic significance, and work has started on radically transforming the whole complex into a centre for the arts, leisure and tourism, with a museum, restaurants, art galleries, a theatre and probably a few shops too. While we're on the subject of law and order, the vacant police station in Wan Chai is also a listed building. Dating from 1932, this building is waiting for somebody to come up with an idea for what they call adaptive reuse. Although frankly the appearance is so forbidding, I personally wouldn't blame them if they pulled it down. This interesting building on the corner of Lower Albert Road and Wyndham Street was put up in 1913 as a cold storage warehouse. It's now an arts centre called the Fringe Club, and part of the building is occupied by the Foreign Correspondence Club, popular with journalists and diplomats. At the top and bottom of the long flight of granite steps that link Dedell Street with Icehouse Street are 4 gas lamps from the Victorian age. These lamps are kept in working order and feature as colonial artefacts on virtually every tourist itinerary. In a bay near to the southernmost tip of Hong Kong Island sits the town of Stanley. There are some interesting things to see here. Not far from the bus station is a welcome supermarket. This building, which dates from 1859, is actually the old police station. Its claim to notoriety is that the Japanese equivalent of the Gestapo used it as their headquarters during the war, and they extended it to make room for a mortuary. Next door to the old police station is Stanley Post Office. 2 interesting features are the George VI letterbox and the postage stamp vending machine, both of which are for display only. Probably the most striking feature of the waterside is Murray House. The area of central Hong Kong now known as Admiralty was originally military land given over to dockyards and barracks. In the 1970s, when the UK's worldwide defence commitment was being reduced, this land was gradually handed over for civilian use, but some of the buildings on it, like Flagstaff House, were deemed to be of historical significance. In the case of Murray Barracks, which date from 1844, The compromise reached was to dismantle the building and reassemble it somewhere else. It was finally reassembled here in 1999, although there are stories that in the intervening 16 years some of it went missing, and that the reconstructed Murray House is slightly smaller than it was originally. Blake Pier was also transported to Stanley from Victoria City. Named after the 12th Governor, Sir Henry Blake, the pier stood beside Victoria Harbour until 1993, when a further bout of land reclamation caused it to be uprooted. Blake Pier ended up here in 2007 as part of a Stanley waterfront improvement project. Before leaving Stanley, there's one more place we have to visit. Stanley Military Cemetery occupies a tranquil spot near the bottom of the peninsula. Although maintained as a military cemetery, this place also contains the graves of the civilian internees who were held in Stanley Prison just a short distance away. The number of graves are still marked by the original headstones erected by the prisoners of war, who collected the granite blocks and carved the inscriptions themselves with whatever tools they could muster. There are now 598 Commonwealth servicemen of the Second World War buried or commemorated in this cemetery, as well as 96 civilian internees. The cemetery also contains the new Hong Kong Memorial, which commemorates by name all the Chinese casualties of the two world wars who have no known grave. Given that Hong Kong Island itself is the oldest British possession in the region, it's not surprising that the British heritage is more profuse here. But let's not forget that there's more to Hong Kong than just the island. Across Victoria Harbour, Kowloon has a number of listed buildings, and one of the most impressive is the Kowloon Magistracy. This building was constructed in 1936 as the Magistrates' Court, becoming a district court in 1957. In 1997, it assumed its current role as the Lands Tribunal. Also in Kowloon is the Museum of History. This houses a permanent exhibition on the history of Hong Kong, and the displays are mightily impressive. If I have one small criticism, it's that the prehistory of the Hong Kong Islands and the people who used to inhabit them is a little overstated. There is, however, a substantial section dealing with the Japanese invasion, and it doesn't hold its punches. Post-war culture, the economy, and the rise of manufacturing in the 1960s are also very well covered. The wealth of British street names illustrates that modern Kowloon, outside the walled city, was very much a British creation. Beyond Boundary Street, the local street names become predominantly Chinese.
Now this is Boundary Street in Kowloon. On my left is Kowloon proper, which was ceded to Britain under the Convention of Peking in 1860. On my right is what was China until the new territories were leased to Great Britain in 1898 for 99 years. So we're standing on what was originally the boundary between British Kowloon and China.
This is the old Taipo police station. It's the oldest police station in the new territories and was built a year after the land was acquired on a 99-year lease from the Chinese government under the Second Convention of Peking. It was on this spot, on the 15th of April 1899, that the Union Jack was raised after a successful military action against renegade Chinese forces. The police station was promptly put up as a symbol of colonial authority and continued in use for nearly 90 years.
Well, I've come all this way in the pouring rain to see the old Taipo police station, but it seems that this is all we're going to see today.
Across the road is the old District Office North, which was built around 1907 and included a magistrates' court. It was the earliest seat of the civil administration of the new territories, and colonial administration and land registration continued to be carried out here until 1961. It's now used by the Scouts as a regional headquarters. Before we leave Tai Po, there's one more interesting thing to see. Tucked away behind the bushes at the end of the main shopping street is the old police bungalow. Built in 1909, this was once the official residence of 4 single police officers. In Britain you probably wouldn't even notice a building like this, but here in Tai Po it's extremely incongruous. Returning to Hong Kong Island, there's little to say about Victoria Peak that hasn't already been said. The views are quite frankly breathtaking. My one disappointment during my recent visit was that the Royal Mail style letterbox I was expecting to find on the Peak had been removed. I was relieved to discover that it's just undergoing restoration work and should be back in situ by summer 2014. According to the enthusiasts, there are still 63 British style letterboxes in service in Hong Kong. Here are just a few of them. At the Central Post Office, there's a small display of the history of postal services in the colony, and you can also buy models of the different types of letterbox which used to be commonplace. If you walk down from the Peak, one of the first places you come to is the Zoological and Botanical Gardens. Founded in 1871, this is one of the oldest zoological and botanical centres in the world. As well as more than 1,000 species of plants, the gardens are also home to some 600 birds, 70 mammals and 40 reptiles. At the south end of the gardens is a memorial arch dedicated to the Chinese who died assisting the Allies during the 2 World Wars. There is also a very regal statue of King George VI. Across the Upper Albert Road from the Zoological Gardens is Government House. The guidebooks will tell you that 25 of the total 28 British governors of Hong Kong lived here, but not in this actual house. The first Government House was built here on this spot in 1851 and took 4 years to complete. It is described as a neoclassical mansion pillared on 4 sides. But by the 1930s the old mansion was becoming very costly to maintain, and there was talk of selling off this site and building a new Government House in a quieter spot. The new site and the funding for it were agreed, but then the war in Europe broke out and all major schemes were suspended. In the process of building air raid tunnels underneath it, the foundations were so seriously damaged that Government House quite literally began to fall down. During the occupation, the Japanese substantially rebuilt Government House, which morphed into this unusual hybrid of Japanese and neoclassical architectural styles, a curious sort of East meets West. It was here, in this very building in which they had obviously taken a great deal of pride, that the Japanese were obliged to sign the formal surrender in September 1945.
So, although this building isn't quite as old as it's made out to be, at least the lodge gates are original. They date back to 1851.
A short walk away from Government House is Hong Kong Park, which was officially opened in 1991. The park covers an area of 8 hectares and is considered to be an outstanding example of modern design and facilities blending with the natural landscape. The park contains a number of historic buildings, the most significant of which is Flagstaff House. Flagstaff House is the oldest example of Western-style architecture remaining in Hong Kong. The first occupant was Major General George Charles d'Aguilar, General Officer commanding from 1844 to 1846. Flagstaff House remained the residence of Hong Kong's commanding officer right up until 1978. In the 1980s, it was carefully restored to its original mid-19th century appearance, and the interior was modified to make it suitable as a museum. It's now the Museum of Teaware, which is a branch of the Hong Kong Museum of Art. This building is known as the French Mission, which currently houses the Court of Final Appeal. Built in the mid-19th century, it's had a number of occupants over the years. Most famously, this is the building where the indomitable Franklin Gimson set up his provisional civilian government in August 1945, with a sorry band of sick and emaciated internees newly released from Stanley Prison. The end of our journey is the Cathedral Church of St. John the Evangelist, the seat of the Archbishop of Hong Kong. This is the oldest surviving Western ecclesiastical building in Hong Kong and the oldest Anglican church in the Far East. Its first Sunday service was held on the 11th of March 1849. Now dwarfed by the surrounding skyscrapers, it's hard to believe that this church once dominated the Hong Kong skyline. On Christmas Day 1941, the day the colony surrendered to the Japanese, a service was conducted here while shells were exploding all around. It was during the war that the original stained glass windows were lost. The first pew on the south side of the interior bears the Royal Arms, as it was formerly reserved for the Governor or any member of the royal family visiting Hong Kong before the handover in 1997. Outside the cathedral is a memorial to the dead of 2 world wars, and beside that is the grave of Private R.D. Maxwell of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps, who was killed in action not far from here just a couple of days before the surrender. It's the only burial within the cathedral precinct, and a tombstone was placed on top of his resting place in 1947. Maxwell's grave is symbolic of the hundreds who gave their lives in defence of this territory. Despite the fact that Hong Kong is now part of China politically as well as geographically, its history will be forever entwined with the history of the British people, who will never forget the sacrifices made here by both English-speaking and Chinese people alike. In this short film, I focus primarily on British heritage, but let's not forget that this is, and always has been, a predominantly Chinese country. I hope one day to return to Hong Kong to look more closely at the Chinese heritage, which, from what I've seen already, is equally fascinating.